Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Grace Again podcast, an ongoing conversation with the people of grace, where we talk about all kinds of things, such as church and life, culture and theology. This is beta episode number 8, recorded on Wednesday, October the 19th, 2016. I'm your host, John Harris, and in this segment, I am pleased to welcome to the Grace Again podcast, Beau and Amanda Dusseault. First thing I want to jump into is just ask you to introduce yourselves, and including all your children's names, and where you live, and something about your life that you might want to share.
Well, my name is Beau, and this is
Amanda.
We have 4 children. Our first son, Henry, our biological son. Mm-hmm. And we have 3 other children that we've adopted from China. The oldest is Gabe. And then there's James, and then there's Andrew, who we just call Drew.
Good. Where did the two of you meet each other? I'd love to know, maybe kind of go back pre-kids, maybe even pre-marriage, before marriage, and give us a little snapshot of, as Christians, we believe God has a plan and kind of brings us together, and has a plan in how he's doing that. Go back as far as you want to go back and just sort of, lead us up to the time where you met and how you met and how you decided to get married.
Go ahead.
Well, we met at University of Florida, freshman year in physics class, and started dating, I think, a couple years after that. And then Beau went to medical school at Emory, so he was up here for his first year, and we got engaged during that year. And
when did you get married? Like what month and year? And
May 24th, 2003.
Great.
Yeah, and actually, I was against being a doctor as well, as it turns out, and so we were both dead set against it, and therefore,
here we are.
Someone had a better plan. I guess.
Absolutely. Now, were you against it in the sense of like during college, or as you're making a decision about whether to go to med school and can pursue this, and you're kind of fighting it, or what?
No, I just even before college and even going into college, I did not want to go through all the schooling. I did not want to, for the same reasons. I didn't want to have the time commitments and the strain sort of long term. Mm-hmm. But I had a very influential grandmother, as it were, who basically got me to do a few things and shadow a couple of physicians, and I was hooked. So it just kind of fell in place.
Although he still wants to quit to be a beach body coach.
Of course.
It's my other calling.
Yeah. On certain days, I'm sure that's a feeling, overwhelming feeling you have.
Yeah.
So did you have, Beau, I'm curious to know, did I understand you had like medical practice or physicians or doctors in your family, or where did the interest come from?
Well, I had one grandfather who was a family physician where I grew up. His wife was my influential grandmother, as we'll refer to her. Okay. But she was a nurse, and she felt like I had a lot of qualities that he did. She felt that he and I were very similar. And so she said, you would be a great, whatever doctor. And so she's the kind of lady that once she decides it's law until you can prove her otherwise. So
I hear you.
I'm glad she was like that in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. So you met at University of Florida. I don't believe I remember you saying where each of you were from, like where you grew up or so.
I'm from Panama City, Florida, and Amanda grew up kind of all over the place from the military, but Tampa area is where they call home.
Yeah. Now, do you tend to have vacations or family trips back to those areas still? Do you have family in those areas, or where do you go?
They're all still there.
Yeah, they're
we
all
go
still
to
there.
China now for our vacation.
Yeah.
Vacation.
Yeah, right. In quotes. Yeah. Well, let's move on. This is exciting because you get married, and I'm curious to know when you got married, as you got married. I'm assuming you had some sort of general idea and plan and dream to have a family, have children. Is that true? And if so, like, how did that lead up to your first child, Henry? I believe you said, right? Your first child, your biological child.
Yeah, Henry. So we actually talked even when we were dating about the potential for adoption down the road. I think it was just kind of always on our hearts as a possibility. I envisioned us having probably 3 or 4 kids of our own, and then and then pursuing it.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't the path for us in the end. Was that similar for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we both came from families with 3 kids each, which ironically enough seemed big to us at the time we got married. In our culture now, that's a pretty large family.
Yeah.
People are like, ooh, 3, but now 3 seems real small. But yeah, and so I think we kind of envisioned a larger family, and we didn't have a particular number. It was just kind of see how it goes.
Yeah. And so, before we move on kind of through your family and through your children and the journey in adoption, I want to just, like, Henry was born, right? And so what was that like for you? You're your first child. Was it kind of what you expected? And it.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. It was completely life-changing, not only because we became parents, but just it made us better.
Well, it was during his residency, so
I wasn't home very much.
I stopped working and stayed home with Henry, and it's because of that time with Henry that I was saved, and Henry changed our lives, or the Lord used Henry to change our lives, and we would probably maybe still have adopted without Henry, but
I don't know. It wasn't. I mean, we hadn't. When Henry was born, it had been kind of, I wouldn't say off the table, but it really wasn't any part of our discussion or forethought in any active sense. But he brought us together closer as husband and wife.
Well, the Lord did, because
right.
Using Henry and actually a TV show, The Duggars, which I watched all the time when I was home with Henry, and just saw their children and the righteousness in their children, and was just drawn to them, and checked out a couple of her books from the library, Michelle Duggars. And she had a couple of resources at the back that she had read when she was a young mother, new mother. So I checked a couple of those out from the library, and it was just like, how do I do this? My brothers are both convicted felons. I don't have a relationship with my parents. It's just not. That's not how I was raised, and that's not how my family turned out. So I wanted to do it different. So I was reading the books, and it was, about child training, which I could get on board with. It made sense. But then about the other part of it, about teaching your children about the Lord and leading them to the Lord. And I would just be awake at night because I didn't know what in the world that looked like, or, how that would be possible. And over the course of a year, we had started going to a very small church that was completely unlike any church we had ever been to. And through seeing the people in that church and their relationships with each other, and it was just so different. And I didn't understand it, but we kept going. And I think and our marriage was really rough, but we had a friend from college who was up there
at that church.
He and his wife, and she I really believe the Lord brought her back into our lives at that time so that she could walk with me through that, and her husband could walk with Beau. And it just came to one day we were in the car together, and she asked me to tell her my testimony. And I was like, I always hate this question. My grandfather was a preacher. That's my testimony. So I've always believed the story. And she was just like, well, do you care if I tell you some things I see in your life? And I was like, I was ready to hear it. I was so open because I did not want to mess up with Henry. So she was just like, I see selfishness, and I see no love between you and Beau, and I don't see blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I mean, you're right. And I've tried to change it. I see it, and I've tried to change it. And she kind of just explained to me repentance, and no one had ever explained what repentance looks like every day.
Wow.
I was driving, and I just remember saying, I don't know that I was ever saved. And we didn't pull over. We didn't stop, or, we just kept talking. And I got home and pulled my Bible out of the basement. And our pastor had been saying, if you're going to memorize a chapter of the Bible, I would go to Romans 8. And I was like, well, let me just look at Romans 8. I opened it, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Let me go to Romans 1. And I got to the part, verse 21, where it was like, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. And that was the first time I'd ever read the Bible. And I was like, whoa, that's me.
Wow.
And they were doing a class at our church on the foundations of the faith. And it just happened to be starting right then. And I got to go. And the first one I went, it was about repentance. And I was like, whoa, that just happened. And then the next one was like baptism with the Holy Spirit. And I was like, whoa, I think that just happened. Yeah. And so then I just got to be discipled by our pastor's wife and that girl who was told me the truth in love. Mm-hmm. And so it's just all that happened because of Henry.
Oh, wow. Wow. I appreciate so much you sharing that. I can resonate and relate a little bit in this sense. When I was 12 years old, my parents, who did not have a great marriage most of my 12 years, my mom got pregnant and had my little brother. And my little brother, Michael's life and birth changed their life in a very similar way that you're describing how God used Henry's arrival really shaped your life. Now, did this happen, this change of life happen almost simultaneously, Beau? I mean, where did you fit into Amanda's newfound faith?
That's I'm not sure exactly how to answer. So I would say that I was just a really weak Christian. Mm-hmm. Like I had faith, I had belief, I placed it there, but it seemed like it was just kind of on hold. Mm-hmm. Residency, the hours were very demanding. I never had time on Sundays to go to church at Scene.
And I wouldn't let him. I wouldn't let him play Christian music. I wouldn't let him. Yeah. I wouldn't go to church with him.
I would turn the radio on to a Christian station, and she would turn the radio off.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that was, and just not being very, well, even to this day, still have a hard time putting my foot down if I felt like I had something to do. But it was even more so then. I was more about keeping the peace in our home and just hoping that with enough time, maybe things would. We lived in Atlanta before we went to Kentucky, which is when all this happened, or where all that happened. And she did not want to go to Kentucky. And I just kept hoping, well, if we can just, settle here or go back to Atlanta later, things will get better. And I think I was hoping for something that was probably not really the problem to really come along. And so we kind of happened, both of us together, as far as engaging this church, our friends. I had gone with this couple a few times throughout the years to churches with them as they were trying to find a church home as well with their little kids. And so I had maintained the friendship with them. He was one of my best men in college. I mean, my wedding. Mm-hmm. He was a college roommate of mine. He was a groomsman. And so we had that connection, but it was just, there was just no free time. I mean,
yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, but the weekends became seemingly easier around the same time because of just the way that my training went. And so that was around the same time that occurred. And then I had a 6-month easy rotation, and all of a sudden I'm home a little bit more. Henry's around. This kind of all started happening in the middle of that. And it just kind of, shock, surprise, it was perfect timing.
Yeah, yeah. But you started, if I understand it correctly, in the story you're sharing here, at some point right in there, you started going to this, what you called a little church. But Amanda, you were going, were you going? And if so, you were going as a non-believer, right? You're like, why were y'all going to this church?
I would say, I would have told you my whole life I was a believer.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I really thought I was. Mm-hmm. And I think I ran into this friend probably when Henry was around 6 months old. We ran into each other. And I had been reading those books, and I was all self-righteous, like, I'm going to homeschool my kids, and I'm going to discipline them.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And she was like, great, let's hang out. So we had been hanging out, and then her husband challenged Beau that we should go to their church for 3 weeks. And so that's how we ended up at their church. Okay. But I was deeply offended when we first arrived because my whole life had been about me. I'm smart. I'm this, I'm that. And none of the women cared to know what I did for a living or how many degrees I had or what kind of family I came from. None of them cared. And I was just like, I'm mad at y'all, but I want to be here.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Another part of, go ahead, Beau.
We'll say that very day, actually the first day we went, the pastor and his wife had us over to lunch afterwards. And turns out they live not even a half a mile from us. Okay. And this church was 20 minutes away. I mean, it wasn't anywhere near anybody. In Lexington, that's more than across town. Yeah. And so that was forever away of the church, but they happened to live right next to us. And so did one of the other elders. Mm-hmm. So it was just amazing. The concentrated time that first day really I think it was kind of set.
I don't know. I remember they had us over for lunch, and I remember him saying, what about you? Is there anything we can we can pray for you or anything we can help you with? And I was just like, no, I don't need any help. I've got it all together.
Wow.
They were like, what in the world? This girl.
That's great. Another part of your story, real quick, that I can just relate to right now is both of you know that Patty and I have a daughter, Courtney, who's been married for 2.5 years and doesn't live in Lexington, but lives in Louisville. And a month ago, Andrew and Courtney had their first child. And so, every Tuesday night, we know what Courtney's doing with her little girl, Anastasia. She's watching the Duggar show every Tuesday night. and so when you said that, I was like, oh, well, just like my daughter, Courtney right now. She's like, learning from that example of
people have strong feelings about them, but if it hadn't been for their witness on TV.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Well, let's move on. What were the circumstances of, you're now a 3-person family, and what were the circumstances around this desire that you said you'd had a while, even before Henry was born, of actually getting serious about this, adoption? Like, can I share us how that happened?
Well, we once Henry was born, we were kind of like, this is great. Like, why did we wait so long? Let's have some more, and fast forward 3 years and it just wasn't happening, basically. And short version is, like I said, it had kind of been on our hearts at some point in the past, and it just kind of resurfaced. And around that same time, we were moving back here to Atlanta area. And we knew that financially it might be a consideration then, and I'd be more available, be home more. It just kind of made sense to consider pursuing it. But that being said, when we first looked to it, it actually really looked very insurmountable. There's a certain, for China specifically, there's a certain, so I would say financial or net worth kind of component that we just didn't have any net worth coming out of residency. Yeah. And so actually before we even did that, with the goal of adoption, we actually went through the foster system for about a year or so before we even really settled in on a international setting. And so we did the training for that. We had a few kids come through the house, and we learned very quickly that it tore us up every time they left. And it also messed with Henry a little bit.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. He was like, well, I don't understand. Where's baby? Where's this little girl? Like, where did she go? Like, how come she's not here anymore? And like, even though we knew there's one girl we did respite for a week for another family. And so we knew the day we got her, that on Sunday she was going back to her foster home and her foster family. And when that Sunday came, we were just destroyed. Wow. And so we kind of learned that wasn't really probably the right path for our family at the time. And so we kind of picked up back into it, looking for a way to do a more permanent adoption into our family.
And the Lord provided. Beau went to a wedding with an old medical school friend and some other friends of ours that I had been in a Bible study with them at University of Florida. Wow. Of all things. And we had lived in the same apartment complex. We got married the same summer. Her husband went to medical school at Emory too. And he and Beau happened to be anatomy cadaver lab partners the first day of medical school. And so he found out that I knew them. And anyway, we've been great friends. So he was at this wedding too. And they were catching up like, oh, what books have you been reading? What have you been struggling with? And we had just been talking. We had just started talking about China adoption. And Brian actually said, well, Erica came to me the other day and said she thinks we're supposed to adopt from China. And Beau was like, whoa, well, we think we are too. So, of course, I was on the phone with her. And we went with the same agency, and we got our files at the same time and adopted from the same orphanage. And we're actually in China together with them. Wow. The first week of our trip, and then the Acres the second week. So the Lord just set us up with friends. It was like a party. Yeah. Yeah. The most circumstances.
It was so surreal. It's like, well, let's go hop in the van and go to the embassy in Guangzhou, China with
our neighbors.
With our neighbors, 2 of their children that we know, and they're 2 new girls, and then our 2 kids, and it was just like, it was nuts. Yeah. It was nuts. Yeah. Yeah. But that's how it surfaced. It came up and it kind of faltered, and then we tried a different path, and that kind of faltered, and
then the Lord gave us companions so we could be brave together. Yeah. He's given people to be brave with together both times now.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. So you for that first adoption, you're going through the process of the ups and downs, the hurdles like you're describing, the companions to get you through it, and I mean, so you make it to China and pretty much help us understand and like maybe educate us a little bit. Like when you go to the country, it's a pretty much a done deal, is it or is it not? Like you're going to China and
unless there's a major glitch.
There are a few variables, but
there are a few places where it can fall apart, but not usually. I mean, it's pretty cut dry there.
Unless you back out or you're adopting an older child and they back out, but.
Wow. Yeah. So you make it there and just give us sort of a snapshot of the process with James. Like that was your first adoption and like when do you first see him or meet him or how does that work?
So you usually get your child. You usually take custody of your child on a Monday morning or sometime on a Monday. So we got in on Sunday afternoon and met him on Monday and took him with us. And they have this 24-hour harmonious period during which you can decide whether or not you want to continue with the adoption. And if you don't, there are devastating consequences for the child.
Wow.
It's obviously like the most stressful 24 hours of this child's life.
Now, what about your life? What about your life? Is it stressful also for the adoptive family?
It depends how your child reacts.
It could be. James was kind of like a bump on a log, so it was kind of like
Gabe and Drew. It was the most stressful 24 hours of our life, but with James, he was kind of like, oh, here's my family. I've been waiting for a family, and here you are. Let's go.
He cried once.
Yeah, he was
for
a
little while, and that was it. Yeah.
And then he discovered food.
He discovered food. His love language. And the next morning, we have videos of, us laughing and playing with him, and now we understand it better because he just laughs at anything and everyone. But that Amanda hit on the head. I mean, he was just waiting for a family.
Yeah.
Like he just needed someone to be kind of plugged into him and him be plugged into him. And he was going to be all right.
Yeah. Now, what is your understanding of what James and the other boys or any adoptive child is being told on that end in China? Like how are they being prepared?
James had minimal preparation. We had sent him through a courier a photo album of us. Mm-hmm. And some other small gifts, but it can create a lot of problems in the orphanage for children to have personal property and for children to be getting families when some are not. So you just never know if they're ever going to see your gifts or.
Right.
So he wasn't really told. They probably just schlepped him up, and he was like an infant when we got him. He had just turned 3, but in every respect, he was newborn or 12 months old.
Yeah. He still had some reflexes that should have gone away by a year, and he was 3 years old and still had like the startle reflex. And
right.
So he was very, very, very delayed.
Well, Gabe and Drew came from a specialty foster home for visually impaired children called Bethel, China. And so we've had access to photos of them and videos of them, and we're able to Skype with them a few times, which they don't see, and we don't speak Chinese. So it was very awkward and not probably very fruitful, but they allowed us to send a PowerPoint presentation describing our family and our home, and they described everything to the kids. So they knew a little bit. They knew a lot more than
that's way more than normal.
Okay. Yeah. I would assume that the Skyping was a big benefit to you to like literally see the 2 boys that you very well might be adopting, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But they had advocacy videos and advocacy photos and stuff before. And then, you are able to connect through social media, thank God, with other families who are adopting from the same place. And when they go, they might go before you, and they're able to get pictures or videos of your kids. And
I see. Well, Beau and Amanda, like after James came home, between James coming home and becoming a part of your family, to the decision and the prompting and the actual going to back to China to get Gabe and Drew, like give us like what was that like?
It's terrible.
Well, I don't say tolerated. That's not the right word. I think I handled James's. Shall we say, integration a bit more smoothly than Amanda did. She really had some struggles.
Yeah.
Whereas I found him to be much more easy to kind of just plug right in. because of his personality, I think just being so easygoing, it was just very simple for me to do that. And Henry was so good with him. It just made it easy. I mean, gosh, the first morning that we had James, this is in China now, back for just a second. I mean, Henry, my mom went with us. My mom, the road warrior, the travel partner. So Henry stayed with my mom's room the first few nights, and he came running in the next morning and was like, "James, I'm so glad you're my brother," And James was like, "Who are you?" He's like, "I'm not sure what to do with this energy," But I mean, that's Henry with his brothers, and he's been a big part of it. In fact, when we got to the point of looking at doing it again, Amanda was very careful to bring Henry into this and say, "Okay, now, this one of the boys we're looking at is going to be older than you, maybe by a few months. Is that okay?" And we got his blessing. It's just he's been very good about it. But the first 6 months, the first 3 months were just tough. There's just a lot of.
It was hard. We didn't know.
His special needs. Really.
According to James's file, his special need was malnutrition.
Yeah.
So, he was obviously very delayed. We knew he was very delayed, and he had been examined by an American pediatrician who was just like, "I don't know. He's in there, but I don't know what's going on. So you're just going to have to be willing to take a risk." And I was scared to death, and Beau was scared to death, and we took the risk, and we brought him home, and it was not what I expected. For one thing, I only knew the love I had for Henry, and I only knew every day that was not what I felt for my new adopted son, and that was just heartbreaking. And to someone who doesn't have a lot of parenting confidence or a lot of experience in the adoption world, that's very, very unsettling. So I had some post-adoption depression issues there for a while, and months and months, and every therapist later, we find out that James's need is not malnutrition. He has a brain injury from a stroke at birth.
Oh, wow.
And so that explains part of the difficulty attaching was that he wasn't learning like a typical child. He wasn't making any progress in certain areas, and we were like,
we couldn't
somebody
tell
help us.
Was it stubbornness? Is it inability? What's the reasoning? And it's just like we just felt lost.
And all his therapists were just like, "He's
do great.
precious.
He's
Give him time. He's doing fine." And I was like, "He should be an Iron Man by now with all this therapy," and he's not. And there was one day, 2 falls ago, where I was like, "He is not right. Something's wrong. He's going to fall down the stairs today." And 20 minutes later, I had to wake him up to go meet our social worker, and he fell down the stairs. And I was like, I knew this was coming. Like, he's had a stroke. So
that was actually after we'd already started the process, though. Again,
yes, that was to.
So don't let the lost, we're not sure what to do feeling stop us from pushing forward.
Somewhere in the middle of that, probably after about 6 months, I was like, I know my heart is capable of more than this struggle with James, and I know that our family is not done. And so
we both felt that way.
We started kind of looking into. Well, we didn't.
I knew we weren't done. I didn't think we were ready to start yet.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what we were not on the same page.
So I was spending my days looking at photo listings of children, which is horrible because that's not how we did it with James. We did all our paperwork, and they sent us a file and said yes or no. Do you want him?
Yeah, 24 hours or 72 hours or whatever.
Wow.
And then this time I was looking at advocacy pages and just looking and had no idea what I was doing. Just spending hours being overwhelmed with he's cute, but his needs too hard. She's cute. She's too old. Blah, blah, blah. It's really terrible. It's like really shopping for a child. And so I reached out to Katie Aker and was like, "How in the world did you do this? I cannot."
Yeah.
And she was like, "Have you looked at Bethel's page?" And I said, "Yeah, I have several times, but the little boy on there that I keep going back to is older. We were going for a young child with a minor need."
Yeah.
And we did the first time, and it worked out super well. So I kept going back to Gabe's face, and I was like, "I just don't think I can do this." And she's like, "Well," and I thought they were done. They were not going back to China. And she was like, "Well, I'm looking at this other little boy on their page."
Oh, wow.
Okay, well, safety in numbers. Maybe I can consider this. And she had, she knew a blind adult who was very successful, and we had no next to no experience with
Right.
blindness. And so
when she brought it up, I had a one-word answer.
yeah, he was like,
Nope.
no. So I just started
Really?
watching his videos and just not obsessing, but kind of like,
Obsessing.
Henry, what do you think if we adopted an older boy? What do you think if he was blind? And Henry, of course, would cry at night. I'm worried it's going to hurt when they take my eyes out. And we were like, that's not what blindness means.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I started talking to Beau about it, and he was like, no, we can't do this.
How's that
And
going to work?
Yeah.
we can't. And then I was like, well, I requested his file, so we have now 24 hours to make a decision.
That's great. But this was the
moment where I'm glad I didn't put my foot down. Right?
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
went out to dinner to talk about it. And there's the only person I know who is raising a child with visual impairment, or was at that time, was this lady who lived down in Smyrna. And she, when we were going to get James, she contacted me and was like, I have a daughter from your son's orphanage, which is a miracle because it's a tiny orphanage. They at the time weren't doing a lot of adoptions. And
there have been only been a handful of kids probably in the previous 4 or 5 years that have even been adopted from there.
So
and two ended up here in Cobb County.
I know. Wow.
So we became Facebook friends, and I watched her, and her daughter has albinism and uses a cane and was learning Braille. And so when Beau and I went out to dinner to talk about Gabe's file, he was like, no. And I was like, let me just message this woman and see if she'd be interested in talking to us about raising a child.
I said, I want to talk to her husband.
So I messaged her and said, we're looking at a file of a little boy at Bethel. Would you be willing, or your husband be willing, to talk to my husband about this? And she messaged back immediately and said, which little boy? I'm looking at this one. And my husband's saying no, because we're moving to Marietta in 2 weeks. And so immediately, now I know.
We were at JT Kitchen.
Yeah, now I know 2 other people who are looking at little boys, all going to be in Marietta.
3.
Wow.
2 other people.
2 others.
Yeah. But this was the part where Drew wasn't in the picture yet, right?
Not in the picture yet.
Wow.
These 3 boys were best friends. They were classmates. They hung out together. This was like
they slept next to each other.
Yeah, in the same room.
Little foster
bunkmates. And so it was just all of a sudden it was like, well, this seems kind of ordained. I guess I'll say yes. And actually, that's not really quite how it worked out. So we had another conversation. I can never remember the lady's name.
Oh, yeah. Mary Ann Roberto.
And she had a boy similar to Gabe, and adopted him about a year and a half earlier, had the same retinoblastoma, which is how he lost his sight, and just was same age. And so it was great to hear from her. And she just made this one comment, and she said, well, you looked at his file, you've seen his videos, you've seen his picture. She's like, you don't need to worry about dealing with the blindness. She's like, you could have had a child born with those issues and you would have figured it out. She's like, that's not really the problem. So the problem is you need to know if you feel like he's your son or not.
Wow.
She's like, if he is, then I don't see why we're even discussing this. If he's not, then once again, there's no point in discussing this. And I was like, crap. Because my heart went out to him. And the video was you kind of sunk into his little face, like Amanda said, just kept looking back at it. And he had a little mohawk, which he has now again, of course.
Yeah.
We put that back on his head.
Yeah.
But that was the reality. It was like, well, yeah, he does feel like my son. As much as I don't want to deal with his issues, that's just the reality of it. And so that became kind of like, well, I guess we're doing this.
And it turns out his issues are not issues at all. Like
no. He's more
kid.
capable than most kids his age.
Wow.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Wow.
He rides just down the street. He does trash and unloads a dishwasher. I mean, it's just like he's not even blind.
Wow. That's amazing. How did you go from Gabe? Like, it seemed to be like to go adopt another child who's blind is a huge thing. And, the Lord worked in Beau's life to say, okay, I think he's my son and all this. But then all of a sudden, now you're going to get 2. Like, how did that work?
Yeah. So if you're going to be friends with Katie Aker, you're going to do some crazy things. And I'm just so glad that the Lord connected us, and they live right around the corner, and we've become great friends. And she's just, when we did our home study for Gabe, you can be approved for 2. Before we met the Akers, I never even knew you could adopt 2 children at once from China. We were just novices.
Yeah.
And when we did our home study, we asked the social worker to approve us for 2 children, just in case. I was terrified. I was already terrified to get Gabe, and I was terrified at the thought of adding 2 children. And then one day, a few months in, the fear just disappeared. And I was like, that means something.
Yeah.
I think we're getting 2 kids.
Well, yeah. And we learned a lot of lessons on our first adoption of faith. And I think maybe for different reasons. For me, it was sort of like same kind of reasoning. Well, if they're your kid, they're your kid. And sort of the idea there being, if it's supposed to happen, it's going to happen, and you're going to be okay. And the Lord's with you, and He's always with you, and whatever the challenges are, you'll figure it out. And so when she asked if I thought that was something we could consider, I said, actually, yeah, I think we could consider that. You had to be a challenge, you had to be tough, but it just kind of made sense, to consider the option of why would we want to limit the Lord,
Yeah.
And we had so many miracles associated with the file for Gabe, and then his friend George, Katie and Rob's boy. There were just so many things for even just that beginning, so many things that seemed to defy coincidence, as Amanda's dad put it once. It was just like, well, it's been littered with miracles. So if we can get another child from the same province and adopt them on the same day, because otherwise we have to travel to 2 different provinces, 2 different weeks, and then that would be a fairly unsustainable trip potentially for us. And so we said, well, if he's willing to provide what seems impossible, then I guess we're going to say yes.
Wow.
That was, at least in my head, that was kind of how it went. And then he did.
Yeah.
It was like, well, guess what? He said,
then we were back to shopping for children, which was terrible again. But we had seen Drew's face also at Bethel. Precious little, he was just a baby then.
Yeah.
And I had asked about him.
He was barely over 1, actually.
Yeah. I had asked about him, and they were kind of like, there were a couple of Westerners working there at the time who we could communicate with, and she kind of just brushed me off like, we haven't seen his file for a year, the end. And I was like, okay. So I went and looked at some other children, and then came back a month or so later and asked her again, where is his file? And she was like, I don't know. Let me look into it. And I'll share this because I don't think that it has nothing really personal to do with Drew. It's not about Drew. It's just a testimony to what the Lord did for him. It took some digging in, and Bethel's an NGO. They're not supposed to have anything to do with the adoption side. So we were having our agency try to track down his file, and they were kind of working behind the scenes to see, without raising any suspicion, if Bethel was to see if they could figure anything out. And come to find out, he had a failed adoption with a British couple. They had backed out, and for some reason, Bethel doesn't handle any of their paperwork at all. It's from the orphanage that the child came from. They have the paperwork, but
he's at Bethel.
He's at Bethel. Yeah. When this adoption failed, his orphanage, for some reason, assumed that he was dead and trashed his paperwork. So, if we hadn't pushed, and it took a lot of arguing and back and forth with our agency, nobody knew he was alive except for Bethel. So
because he was there, right?
He was there,
so
yes, and we could see him, but he never would have had a chance to be adopted.
He never would have had a file, and he would have had adopted. I mean, he would have aged out, and he would have been homeless forever.
Yeah.
Unless somebody, along the way had done what we did, or what she did, I should say. She did all the work.
But you two were fighting for a son that was not even yours yet.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well,
and we've just gone through that with our daughter in China too. So she didn't have paper. We're adopting again. A little girl.
Well, share this part of the story. I mean, that's fascinating. You got to include this before we end our podcast. so bring.
You need 2 podcasts for us.
Yeah, probably so. We might need to do just break this into 2 I didn't realize this. Bring the journey with Gabe and Drew kind of to a close. So you go get them, you bring them home, and what's that been like?
All right. While we were in China, it was terrible. It was absolutely
horrifying. Yeah, the James trip was easy. And so we were like, oh, we got this, And that first day, the just amount of energy that was injected into our hotel room. And I remember just sitting in the corner, like literally, like huddled in the corner, looking at all the 4 boys just going nuts. I said, oh, God. this is it. Like, this is our life. Like,
Wow.
What have we done? Like, I think I actually said the words out loud one time. What have we done? It was just such a different experience. It was such a harder trip. 2 new ones, the 2 blinds, and both of my parents were there this time.
Wow.
And even with both of their help, it was just a horrible trip. But we get home, we get through the typical first few months to sort of adrenaline rush survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
We both sink into various levels of, stress about this, don't freak about that, trying to figure these things out. She found a teacher for the visually impaired to help. I mean, all these things we've been doing for a year that Amanda helped coordinate with them and starting to homeschool
the Lord did it.
Wow.
Well, yeah.
Dropped people in our lap.
It's another miracle story.
Yeah, right. Wow.
It really is. But just, all this stuff. And so, a year ended a few months ago, about 4 months ago, I guess. We met our, year mark with them, and we sort of said, what happened to that year, But
wow.
It feels like they've been with us for forever.
Mm-hmm.
Except that I would say one unique thing about Gabe is we almost have already been, involved with Drew for half of his life. And James, we have literally been involved now for about half his life. But Gabe, we are scratching the surface as far as time goes because he's older.
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be things that we unpack there for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's like we can't imagine anything without him now.
Yeah,
totally different adjustment.
Yeah, absolutely. But so before you go into this new news you just kind of shared and broke there, give us an idea of how do the 4 boys relate to one another? How do they play? How would you describe the dynamic of their relationships? Like not with parents, you two, but like with one another.
I think there was a honeymoon period where everyone kind of got along really great. Now they're normal siblings.
Yeah.
It's very normal. They get along really well, and they also fight really well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have 2 that are the same age, and then 2 more that are basically the same age, effectively speaking.
Yeah.
So they kind of it's funny because they get mad at one, they have 2 others to go pick from and play with. So I think that there's a little bit more harmony there, actually, in a sense, because there's cushion.
Yeah. Now, and Henry, as the only biological child of your family, like how is he continuing to relate and does he have his ups and downs? I mean, this is real life for him, right?
Yeah, the initial adjustment about having less of Beau's time specifically, because we're just so much busier now, was difficult. But I think he was born for this. He just is so tenderhearted, and he has to learn some lessons about, they came from a harder place, so we can't, everything's not equal and fair always in our house, and things are explained differently, and we have to be more sensitive about a lot of subjects, but he's learning, and he just loves them.
The Lord has really put a heart in him that I just can't believe it. It's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
But he still will get to talking to a kid and be like, how many brothers and sisters do you have? And they'll say none, and he'll be like, you're lucky.
What was that?
That was on our ski trip.
Oh gosh.
Right, Henry?
Yeah. Well, Henry's what, 7 years old or so? I mean, how old is he?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love to hear you say that, he's got all the other functional, practical challenges of a 7-year-old, but you say that he really possesses the main thing, the most important thing, and that is a love for people and a love for these brothers. I mean, if you got that as a foundation, I mean, you can deal with this typical 7-year-old childhood things, right?
He chips in and helps. I mean, like if we go to Costco, we're a site for something. It's always an adventure. But we go places. So recently we went on a Cub Scout camping trip. Me and Henry and Gabe did, the 2 older ones, and we were with all these other kids. And then David and George Aker were with us, and Rob was busy managing some of the Scout activities. So I was kind of handling all 4 boys. And it's just amazing how I can go to Henry anytime and say, hey, you got to go get Gabe and help him through this. And he just does it. No questions asked, no heartbeat. He's happy. He's happy to help his brother, to enjoy things, to be a part of things, and to do things together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the time.
There have been some bloody noses.
I understand.
Brothers. But yeah, no, they get along really well.
Well, you said a scouting trip. I mean, like that's an example, but what are some other things that your family likes to do together? Surely after, hours and hours of being inside your house, that gets kind of old, right? Or whatever. So I'm assuming you guys plan outings and do different things together to.
Mostly hiking.
Okay.
Living near the Battlefield National Park here, we do a lot of hiking there. Swimming pool is a big thing in the summertime. We live there. Amanda convinced me to have us all take them skiing this last winter up in West Virginia.
Yeah.
So we took them. We got them up on skis. Gabe went down the mountain and everything.
Well, the things you're describing, the activities you're describing, in my mind, I don't have the experience you have. So in my mind, seem like close to impossible, given especially the blind thing. How do you overcome? Do you overcome the blindness pretty easily?
I think so. For, everyone's always like, Gabe's so great. And yeah, he's really great, but he's not great because he can read Braille or because he's going to ride a bike or can ski or swim. He's great because he was dealt like every bad card you could be dealt, abandoned, cancer, having your eyes removed, going through that and chemotherapy by yourself and not having a family for the first 6.5 years of your life. That's why Gabe is great. He's still so motivated to be a part of our family and to try everything. And he just wants to be a normal kid.
Wow.
Yeah, we sort of learned, you kind of pick what you want to do and you just do it and you figure out the blindness later.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it's just, and it turns out there's always a way.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is that you really don't make what others might call a handicap. You don't really look at it and see it as a handicap. You go about life and you figure out those kind of things later. Another way to look at it is that we all are really handicapped in different ways, and just to be a family and to be to go for the adventure and just let God help you through it and figure it all out. That teaches your children and the two of you just great lessons. I would assume that.
Yeah. Well, considering how terrified we were going in and not knowing what in the world we were getting into with two blind kids.
Yeah.
Amanda's catchphrase for that trip was, "What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?"
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
It's in China.
So another one, and this one not a boy but a girl. Tell us about how this came into being.
Day, the first week we were in China, Drew cried for hours every day. He grieved so intensely for his life at Bethel. And he would get on the bed, and from what I could understand of his Chinese, which was perfect at 2 years old, he through his tears, he would say, "I want to get Fei Fei. I want to get Fei Fei. Get in the car." And he would pretend to drive the car. "Let's go get Fei Fei and take her to America." And so
Fei Fei being his best friend.
I started asking, "Who's Fei Fei?" Well, it's this little girl. And I mean, I think from the way he slept, their cribs were right next to each other. We saw his room, and I think they held hands while they slept, and they were just inseparable. She's in all the pictures, and according to our contacts at Bethel, they were just two peas in a pod. So we kind of, even though I was crying in the shower every night saying, "I'm never doing this again." We got home and just started thinking maybe we should ask about Fei Fei.
Well, and then about a month after being home, we're still in the adrenaline survival mode. Dinner one night, was it Gabe that brought it up?
It was Gabe.
Gabe brought it up.
In
It's
his
like
Chinglish.
He said, "Haba needy" or something. But we need a sister.
Gaby's super needy sister.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was like, all right, from the mouth of babes, let me get on the internet and see what I can do.
Well, we took a quick straw poll, and they all said yes. It was like, well, James, Henry, Drew, y'all want a sister? They're like, well, yeah, of course we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why don't we have one yet? Basically, like, well, I guess we're doing that now.
Yeah. Now, how long ago was that? A few months ago or a year or what?
No, that was a month after we'd been home. That was almost 1.5 years ago.
No, that was this time last year. It's probably about September
August.
We started.
August is when we texted that day when I was in Yellowwater.
Okay, so yeah. She didn't have a file though. Her paperwork wasn't ready, so we just waited. We waited and said, if the Lord opens this door for us, we will go through it. We don't feel desperate that we need a child. I wasn't looking at any other children. It was just her. And in February, we're checking in on her file all this time. And probably in February, we just decided to go ahead and start our home study just in case. Even if her file did show up, it was slated to go to one of the huge agencies out on the West Coast who has right of first refusal. And the people at Bethel were saying, don't don't get your hopes up. She's a young girl. Everybody wants young girls. She's got a minor need. You're not going to get her file. And so we petitioned the Chinese authorities who are in charge of adoptions, wrote them a note explaining our connection to her and the foster home. And they agreed to let us have her file. And then the agency agreed to let us have her file. And finally, in May, her file was ready. So we are currently 31 days with our paperwork logged into the Chinese system, waiting for them to approve us. And after that, it'll probably be about 8 weeks before we travel.
So hopefully mid-January-ish.
Wow. That's exciting. Now, have you already decided and determined how many of you are going to go travel there? All of you or some of you? Or
we've decided on the boat. Well, actually, not even the both of us. That's still up for debate too. We think it'll be us and Henry plus or minus Gabe.
Okay.
But it may be something completely different. We don't know yet.
Yeah. Wow. That's exciting. Now, do you know yet whether you will continue to call her that name? That will be her name, or how does this work with their Chinese name versus an American name? Or
yeah, you can choose their name. A lot of times for older kids who are in their early teens, they'll let them have a choice. She's so young. We're just going to choose her name and keep her Chinese name as her middle name, like we did for the Gabe and Drew.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we know how, even more so, how to pray. I guess this word of this possibility. I mean, it doesn't sound like there's any impossibilities in your life. The Lord is just kind of takes the mountains and like overcomes them in each step of the way. But I'm assuming
that's so great about taking the leaps of faith that we have just seen the Lord move on our behalf, and so personally. And I can't even imagine not knowing that, not having taken the risks and it's not that we weren't afraid. I couldn't sleep for months and months. I couldn't sleep. And we were terrified, and
it does get easier.
Yeah.
After a few times, you kind of realize, okay, yeah, it turns out his promises are true. He has followed through every time. It does get easier after the first few steps, but
we haven't heard from him so specifically as we did then. And I miss that. I guess all I know in my experience is putting ourselves in harm's way and hearing from the Lord because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what about we started this conversation about how God had brought both of you together to get married. How has this journey of having a child and then adopting 3 more and now a girl, a fourth adoption, it was going to be a girl. Are you able yet to look back and see how it's shaping your life and marriage? Are you able to kind of think through like your marriage and your relationship itself is literally affected and influenced by the journey that you've walked together? And in what way? Are you able to know yet how?
I'm not sure how to answer.
I think we depend on each other so much more.
Yeah.
There's so much more at stake now, and I think we just appreciate all the times we just look at each other and we're like, did that just happen? Because our life is so bizarre now. Well, and we laugh at it all the time.
Let's give the classic example that's just current. So Drew and Gabe have prosthetic eyes, and they have a tendency to fall out in public. In stores. Yeah. In the truck. In the pool. Oh my gosh.
Like, is this?
Drew lost one. He doesn't even have one anymore. He just has one eye now.
The one eye.
Yeah. So things like that, and Amanda will text me with some, brief story like that, and I'll be operating, and then the people are reading my text to me to an update, and everyone's just cracking up, and they're like, "What just happened?" This is our reality,
Yeah. Wow. Now, do the boys have any intention in that? Do they understand kind of the effect it has on others?
You would think, but
yeah, I think they're just.
I don't think so. They're just kids. They don't know how much we paid for those things.
Yeah,
they don't care.
I see. Wow, that's good. Well, I know that if anybody has ever had the fortune of looking at your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, it is like, if you ever want to pick me up, a good laugh, just see a family on adventure, and
Look on hers. It's all on hers.
yeah. I know. I
blesses people and encourages people to, take a step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's a great adventure.
Yeah.
I think the greater the step, the greater the reward.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lord is faithful.
Mm-hmm.
If He's called you to do something, or you think it's on your heart, you should really look at it, because we could have missed out if we hadn't. And just the greatest adventure ever.
And now it's just our regular life. We're not taking a risk, except every time we leave the house.
Well, I think that's something that I have been encouraged by your life and your story as you've shared it, and I really believe that others who watch or see this and hear this podcast, I think that's one takeaway is when God puts something on your heart, or you see the possibility of an adventure or a direction to take or a decision, and any of it, all of it seems kind of scary or risky. Your life example is to go for it, and to hold back is to very potentially miss out on the reward of it. And to believe in our hearts that God is faithful, or in our heads, like theoretically, hypothetically, or because the Bible says it and we believe it in that sense is one thing, but it's a different thing. It's an additional step to put him to the test, to step out there, even in the midst of what I've heard from you is great fear at times, uncertainty, sacrifice. I mean, all those things.
People thinking we were crazy, straight crazy.
Still do.
People thought we were out of our minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, it might be true in one sense, but in another sense, you're saying that's another thing you have to deal with is people's impressions, and you have to figure out how to overcome that. You have to say, Lord, my trust is in you. I'm listening to you and your voice, and not the voices of those around me. Some of whom are probably family and friends, even, right? Not just strangers that think you're crazy. Yeah. So here's one last question, and then we'll close off our conversation, and a conversation that I've been totally encouraged by. So appreciative and grateful that you're willing to do this tonight for this podcast. And the question is this: like, in light of your circumstance and experience and everything you've been through, you know that there are other families in your circles of friends and neighborhood and church and work and all that might be considering this, might have thought about this, might have had a thought, but like buried the thought, like, I can't do that, we can't do that. Like, what encouragement would you have for a family who is like considering this? They're interested in adoption. Like, just a few things that you would just offer by way of advice or encouragement.
I think the best advice we got when we were at that stage of not knowing whether to move forward or how, was from one of Beau's female partners who had adopted a set of 3 siblings from foster care several years ago. And when we were first talking about it, she was like, just do something. Just take a step and do something. And for us, that meant signing up for the foster care training. But do something. Have a home study prepared. You don't have to use it.
Right.
Do the foster care training. It's good to know. I mean, it's useful knowledge whether or not you ever have a placement. Do something.
Yeah. Well, I, when you say do something, it's like not only based on because you might very well learn something, or the home study will be of some benefit, but it's also the reality that it's in the midst of that movement that God shapes and forms and gives you some sense of conviction. And it might be that it's not the right time, or it might be that this is not for you. You thought it was for you, but sure. Things get revealed and you learn things, as opposed to, it's more difficult in my experience to really get that traction or discernment if you just sort of hide it, or you don't do anything, you just keep it to yourself. You just, I hear what you're saying, Amanda, like take that whisper or those thoughts and talk to somebody, or sign up for a home study, or do something, and then you can decide for each step of the way, right?
Yeah, a lot of people want to have confirmation before they take a step, and in our experience, the confirmation came after a major leap of faith, both times. Wow,
that's great. Well, I'm going to end with a question that I want to tease you with, in the hopes that you would be willing to do another podcast in the future. And here's the teaser before we hang up and close off here. I'd love to know, not now, okay, but in a future podcast conversation, I want you to consider sharing with us from your experience how those of us who are your friends and your family members and your neighbors and even your church family, how we can be most supportive of an adoptive family. Some of the things that you can help us and educate us with, that we might be not a discouragement or not one who's kind of like a misunderstanding or whatever, or even hurtful, or but things that we can think about that we might be not only an encouragement to you, but truly a support. For example, like when I think about gathering as a care group or a church worship service, or, what are the issues and needs that a family like yours has? And now your family is not only representative of children who have been adopted, but the added element of special needs children and the dynamic of that. I think we could learn so much from your sharing. And so I hope to have you on an additional future podcast. I'll let you guys think about that and consider answering that question, because I think we could learn so much. Do you guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I'm thinking of something super smart alecky to say, but nothing's coming to mind.
No, I think like Amanda said, my partner and I had another partner who a similar statement that he would make is just be different. Mm-hmm. Whether it be adoption or a billion other possible things, everyone's life can have a ministry component. Mm-hmm. And just be different than the average person in America. And I'm constantly convicted of that.
Yeah.
It's funny how I don't even really consider doing what we do right now being different necessarily anymore.
Yeah.
But just be willing and be different.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate you, Beau and Amanda, not only your life, but your time tonight just in this episode sharing with us. And one of the things I appreciate about you is not only your openness to the Lord and your commitment to Him and being obedient to what He's leading you to do, but you guys have fun doing it. I mean, you're like, I know it's not all fun and I know it's hard, but I appreciate every time I see you and every time I'm around you. I mean, those boys and just your family and the truck and just adventure and hiking, and I mean, you're contagious. Your whole family is, and I think that means a lot to others.
We feel oftentimes very ogled and conspicuous. And it's not always friendly, so it's nice to hear a friendly take on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's wonderful. I love your one of those profile pictures on your Facebook page when you guys are all just kind of sitting there in the huddle and the boys are all smiling in different ways, and so that's all good. Well, I'm gonna let you guys go. Again, the sacrifice of tonight's time and all. I know you're tired. Have a great rest of the evening and a week. And thanks so much for your time tonight. Appreciate what you shared.
It's our pleasure. Thanks, John.
All righty. Bye-bye, guys. Thanks for joining us on the Grace Again podcast. If you're looking for a family of faith in Marietta, Georgia, please join us this Sunday at 11 o'clock for our worship gathering. Or visit us on the web at gracechurchmarietta.org. We are a fellowship of followers of Jesus on a mission to love God and love people, as we help others become passionate followers of Jesus Christ, all to the glory of God. I look forward to continuing our conversation on the next episode of Grace Again.